Hello, and welcome back to Adventures in Theater History, where we bring you the best stories from the deep and fascinating history of theater in the city of Philadelphia. I'm Peter Schmitz. In this episode, we share with you a recent talk we had with the Walnut Street Theatre's producing artistic director, Bernard Havard. For a long time now, I've had notes in my files for a possible show about the Walnut Street Theatre. We have mentioned the Walnut many times in this podcast, going all the way back to when it was built to be the home of the equestrian circus of Pepin and Brechard in 1808. We've detailed how it hosted a performance by Native Americans in 1812 when it was the Olympic Theater, and how it hosted the entire Chestnut Street Theater Company from 1820 to 1822, and finally got the name which it would eventually be known by, the Walnut Street Theatre. In fact, we've stopped and told stories that took place on this corner, 9th and Walnut Street, again and again, as we chronicled 19th century Philadelphia theater history. Fanny Kemble, Junius Brutus Booth, Louisa Lane Drew, Charlotte Cushman, James Murdoch, Joseph Jefferson III, Dion Boucicault, Edwin Booth, and the Barrymores all played there. Minstrel shows, musicals, and melodramas were regularly staged there. By 1876, it had proudly posted the words "Oldest in America" on its facade in order to attract public attention during the Centennial Exposition when it hosted the American operetta Evangeline. We even talked about the longtime Walnut stagehand, Pop Reed, and what happened to the strange bequest of his skull to the Walnut Street Theatre back in the 1890s. And when our overall narrative of the podcast reached the 20th century, of course, the building figured significantly again in our episode about Thomas Dixon's play The Klansman. In episode 50, we talked about the Marx Brothers, who were doing their show I'll Say She Is at the Walnut during the summer of 1923. And we've even spent an entire episode discussing how it was the home for the Federal Theater Project's WPA company in the 1930s. And if you are a regular follower of the show's Facebook page, and if you're not, please check it out, you know that we've mentioned the Walnut many times there when sharing images and stories about Broadway tryouts that were done at the Walnut Street Theatre in the 1940s and the 50s and the 60s when it was controlled by the Schuberts. Someday, soon, we'll get all those stories onto the podcast too. But occasionally on Facebook, we've even discussed shows from the nonprofit theater movement years, the 1970s, the 80s, and the 90s. During those times, the Walnut was the home to the Philadelphia Drama Guild, and even during the early period of its current management. But we have rarely examined the theater's present situation, mostly because, well, it's too recent, and I have worked really hard to keep this show away from being considered journalism of any kind. We do history here. We try our best to keep it fun and exciting, but it's history nonetheless. Mostly, we stay safely beyond the memory of anyone still alive. But on other occasions, I have taken advantage of the fact that there are persons around who are repositories of significant historical information. Our interview with Mary Robinson was one of those. I had thought that one day I would do a similar show to that one with Bernard Havard, and earlier this spring, I reached out to him and asked if he would take us on an audio tour of the Walnut Street Theatre's historic displays, and he graciously and generously agreed. Now, the Walnut has been used as a theater history museum for years, despite the fact that the theater building's interior and exterior have been heavily reconstructed at various times. Its historic name and its location have always continued to make it seem like the proper home for the story of Philly theater. As early as 1940, there was a display of theater history memorabilia in its lobby as local theater supporters tried to keep the Walnut from being torn down. During the years of the Schuberts, they displayed many old posters from bygone eras on the walls. In the 1970s, when the building became the official state theater of Pennsylvania, it was rather required to keep historic displays as part of its mission. But then, in the 1980s, the Walnut once again became a producing organization, and it was one of the biggest LORT theaters in the country with a large subscription base. Now, I'm not going to detail all that more recent history today, but amazingly, since that time, the institution has had but one leader, Bernard Havard, and he is a person who is devoted to collecting historical artifacts and material relevant to the Walnut's history. Some he has bought on the open market. A lot came from the former collection of the Charlotte Cushman Club, and some items have also come from the former Edwin Forrest home for retired actors when it was broken up in the 1980s and its collection distributed to various institutions, including, famously, the huge marble statue of Edwin Forrest that first went to the Pennsylvania Historical Society, but now is at the Walnut and standing in its lobby. Having made an appointment to meet and talk with Bernard, Chris Colucci, who has done sound design for many a Walnut show, and I journeyed to the theater in April 2023. But the first person we met as we came in was Associate Artistic Director Brian Curtis, who generously and immediately started showing us some historic artifacts the Walnut had only recently acquired. Now, naturally, we hurried to turn on our recording devices, so it starts a little abruptly, but the first voice you hear is Brian, and then me having a conversation with him, and then a few minutes later, we will shift into Bernard's office and talk to him. And then we go on a tour of the theater. Here we go.
So this is the stuff that is not on display.
Right.
There's a lot.
But there's other stuff on display, I mean, literally all over the building. Like behind us, there's a series of 19th century prints of Forrest and Murdoch and many others. This is a part of a series. You've got it all set up. There's at least 30 of these. And wherever I go in this place, I find things like this, and some of them in bathrooms.
Yeah.
In
Yeah, you can go
closets.
into the men's room right here in the mezzanine and you'll see some stuff.
Right, there's stuff about Edwin Booth in there.
Yeah.
So it amazes me. I mean, to our right, there's a poster, Mary Prevost and her Arab troupe in The Female Gambler. And then here we have Edwin Forrest as King Lear, and Edwin Forrest as Othello.
One of the unique parts about the second floor that I like is on the second floor, we keep a lot of the posters of the productions that got world premieres here. So while it's inspiring and quite historic to see all the productions and the memorabilia from the 1800s, you know, I certainly want to remind people that 100, 200 years from now, these will be the historic artifacts.
Right. But then even I see towards the back of the building, and people are in their offices and working at their desks and talking, so we won't disturb them. But I see above them other historical posters, just above your cubicle.
We live and work amongst the artifacts here.
That's amazing.
Yeah. There's
really,
pictures of you back there somewhere.
I'm sure. I'm sure I'm out there on the wall too. But it's because it's a working institution. It's always recreating itself. It always recreating itself with an idea to keep shows moving. That's why all the history exists.
I call it a living, breathing museum because we're not an exhibit that has finite beginning and end dates. It's living and breathing.
Well, we're standing here literally by the elevators. You can hear people coming and going and doors opening and closing. So we're in a working part of the theater. But I'm hoping in a minute, once Bernard arrives, we'll move into his office, which is up at the front of the building on the second floor. And then we can move out into the lobby areas where a great number of the most prominent historical displays are. Sure. Thank you, Brian. Lovely talking to you. You're one of the many experts here. Hello, Bernard.
Hi there.
Here we are. And we're starting in the inner sanctum. We're starting in your office on the second floor of the Walnut Street Theatre, which I've been in before, and you've pointed things out to me. But now that I have spent a lot of the last 2 years really delving into historical narratives about Philadelphia, I understand them more. But I think you understand them better than anybody. You've been in this office for how many years now? This has been your home base for
40 years.
40 years.
Yeah.
You came here in 1982. Did
Yep.
you? What was the first thing you put in here?
You know, I've forgotten. But all of the memorabilia here and around the theatre has been established and bought or collected over the last 40 years.
Right.
So I don't know what I think I started with that piece actually.
Which is what?
It's a contract
It's over there in the corner by the window.
for general business.
And
It's got a stamp on it.
Okay.
And he was paid, I don't know, something like $135 a week to play utility parts at the Walnut. Stated, I think, 1867, something like that.
And where do you find this kind of memorabilia?
Well, I've been searching for collections. Mark's been very good. He's been flagging on eBay.
That's Mark Sylvester.
Yeah,
business
Mark
manager.
Sylvester,
Yeah.
managing director. And we've put money aside most years, a little bit of money to buy memorabilia if we could afford to do it. This part is a real shrine to Fanny Kemble.
Right, we're over here looking at the back wall of your office, and there's all sorts of framed, amongst things of Edwin Forrest, and I think more recent, there are several prints and pictures of Fanny Kemble.
Fanny.
Yeah.
Fanny.
Especially interesting to me, I didn't know this before. There's one of her, there's a black and white picture of her portrait, which is over at the Rosenbach, and then in the middle is what is that?
There's a watch fob braided from her hair.
Who
The Victorians did that sort of thing.
Yeah, but then underneath seems to be a letter about it.
Yeah, there is. It was at Charlotte Cushman Club.
Right.
When they closed the club, I was able to buy a number of things from
I
them.
see. So somebody braided that watch chain from her hair.
Yep.
Maybe her daughter or her son-in-law? Who knows?
No idea.
Wow.
And there's Stanislavski.
Right, who was here in 1923.
Yeah. He signed it.
It does say 1923, doesn't
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
1923.
Yeah.
A souvenir in French of the Theatre d'Art de Moscow.
Right. He came and played at the Adelphi, north of City Hall.
C. Stanislavski,
Yeah.
Philadelphia,
There it is.
1923.
But there's other interesting things, like I wouldn't expect, like you have Indonesian puppets.
Yeah, Bardeen. David Bardeen went to Indonesia
I see.
to study that kind of puppetry, and he brought those back for me.
I'll have to have him talk to my theater history class about next time we cover that subject. Other things that are in here, some of them relate to the Walnut and some not. There's some large paintings. Some of them are very personal to you. They're inscribed to you, or they're pictures of you.
Yep.
Or there's sets, like in the corner perched on this piano, there's a set model.
Yeah, there's one down here too.
There's another one down here.
That was-
That's the one you just did. That's,
Yeah,
that's
Cat
Cat
and
and Hot
Hot Tin
Tin
Roof.
Roof with the branches poking out through the proscenium, which was so beautiful.
That cleaver memorializes a play.
So there's a
That's
frame.
everything was from the Heather brothers. It was about gratuitous violence. The actual prop itself
Right.
had a pump handle,
Right.
and on the upstage side they
Right.
had little rivulets
Right.
of piping, so you could grab it, and as you slashed
Right.
the character, the blood would come out of
Oh.
the cleaver. And that was when we went to Derby, when we had co-productions with Derby Theatre in England,
Right.
and they gave us that. We gave them a little bell.
Okay.
And that's a theatre called Rainbow Stage, where I was the production manager.
And then below that is that.
That's the Citadel Theatre, built out of California Redwood,
So where you also work.
and opened with Romeo and Juliet. That was the set we had for Romeo and Juliet.
So there's a lot of these.
John
things-
Neville was the artistic director. I was the managing director.
So many of them pertain to you. Some of them are like there's a poster for Campbell's Minstrels.
Yep.
When minstrel shows used to come through at the Walnut Street Theatre.
Yeah.
Glorious success, it says. And there's one for Undine, Spirit of the Waters from 1822. That's when the Chestnut Street Theatre was using this house when their theater had burned down, and they were using the Walnut while they waited for it to be rebuilt. So in the very earliest years of it actually being a theater. So you span literally, that's 2 centuries old right there. So there's 200 years of Philadelphia theater history. Now there's also, I remember there's a book you have
Edwin Forrest's
around
chairs.
the room. I'll describe this for our listeners. There are three,
And a footstool.
and a footstool of very Victorian chairs, heavily carved, dark mahogany, lots of flowery arrangements, and they're upholstered in red silk. And you're saying these belong to Edwin Forrest.
Yes, they did.
How did you get a hold of them?
I got them from the Actors Home in Englewood, New Jersey. When they sold the home here in Philadelphia, the statue, which you'll see downstairs,
Right.
the chairs went with them to the Edwin Forrest wing, and they threw them downstairs in the basement. They had nowhere to put them, and then when we were honoring Edwin Forrest, we honor his birthday here every year, and they asked me if I wanted them, so I got a van, picked them up, had them refurbished in our prop shop, and here they are.
And I think there's a famous photograph of Edwin Forrest sitting in one of those chairs in his study up on North Broad Street. It's amazing. I'll just point out for our listeners, you may hear there's a speaker in this room because Bernard's office, of course, is tied into the intercom for the whole theater. So I can hear some chatter from the stage manager out in the house.
That predates me.
Yeah.
This office actually was a little pied-à-terre for the man who was running the Walnut before I came here. There was a bathroom here,
Okay.
and so you couldn't actually access that elevator to upstairs to the mezzanine. So you couldn't get people with wheelchairs
I see.
or had
So
disabilities.
he lived here. He
Yeah, we would stay overnight.
Oh, I see.
He had a Murphy bed that came from there, and his bathroom was there.
I see.
So the first thing I did was got rid of the bathroom and moved the wall this way so we could have a crossway through from the elevator to the
For
mezzanine.
handicapped access ability. Well, speaking of which, let's use that passageway right now. Let's go that way. So we're going to leave the office, and we're going to turn to the left here and head out into the second floor lobby area of the theater. So we're walking out into the now the second floor mezzanine of the theater. And
The men's toilet is primarily for booth.
that's true. There's a small men's toilet here, and there's all sorts of
Booth
photographs
memorabilia,
of
yeah.
Edwin Booth, which I'm sure he would appreciate, or maybe not. And then we come out, and there immediately you see there's all these black and white small headshots, hundreds and hundreds of smiling or sometimes glowering actors looking at us with all their names underneath. Why are there so many pictures of, look like
These are all the actors that have appeared here since 1983.
1983. And then, but when I first came here in 2005, you were using the actual headshots.
Yeah,
but
we
you
reduced, everybody got reduced.
were running out of wall space.
Yeah,
as I
we did,
recall.
yeah.
So somebody's job was to take all those photographs and scan them and put them in again. It's for people who know local Philadelphia actors, it's always hysterical because you come in and say, "Oh my God, look at this picture person looked 30 years ago."
Lee Golden.
Oh, here's Lee. It's sitting in his underwear
in the dressing
It's a
room.
photograph of him, a framed photograph of Lee with a big mustache and.
He never had a photo to put
Yeah.
up. So
Right.
that's the closest we ever
He
got.
always took photos of other people.
Yeah.
He was very interesting. He always would take very artistic shots, but he didn't take ones of himself. So there he is in his underwear. And then above that is the Hirschfeld sketch of you, with two Ninas in it,
Yeah.
according to up there in your hair there somewhere, no doubt, or your beard. And then we're going to go through these doors into what's called the Langworthy Lounge. Now, I always think of this as the room where you go and get notes.
And pizza.
I think of it as
Pizza.
the
I think
pizza.
it was
This
the
is the
pizza
pizza room.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of running out of wall space, so there's in the center, I'll describe it for our listeners. In the center of the room, there's three long tables pushed together with red chairs pushed around them. And then there's some other chairs against the wall in sort of a bar area in back. There's track lighting up above, but all along the walls in three ranks are posters that have been of every show that's been produced here at the Walnut Street Theatre since 1983 in chronological order, beginning with the Soldiers play, when Charles Fuller's The Soldiers play.
We
the
didn't
Negro Ensemble
produce
Company.
it.
That's
We
right.
presented it.
That was a Negro Ensemble
Negro
Company, but
Ensemble
it was one of the
Company,
first
yeah.
things you presented.
Yeah.
And then one of the first things you produced is over there, A Flea in Her
Yeah.
Ear, by George Fido, and then Oliver the Musical, Mornings at 7, A Perfect Gentleman, and that runs through in chronological order. Some of these I was in, most of them I was not. Everything from Cabaret to She Stoops to Conquer to Carousel to Man of La Mancha, Tintypes and Funny Girl.
The Hired Man was a favorite show.
With Melvin
Bragg.
Melvin Bragg, who I listen to all the time on the BBC now,
Yeah.
of course. But he wrote this show, The Hired Man,
Yep.
which was based on a novel, right?
Based on a novel, yeah.
Just someplace in northern England.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it goes around all the way around all four walls. And talk about running out of. Here's Woman of No Importance, the last show I did here back in the spring of 2020, and then. Now what do? There is literally no more wall space for these posters. They're starting to go outside. Sometimes when I would sit in here, when there was still some wall space, I go, I wonder when they're going to run out of space here. And now we're at that moment. So we've now reached the time. At this point, we all left the Langworthy Lounge and we walked out again into the second floor lobby, past the old wooden eagle, which for many years flew above the Walnut's proscenium arch, a true holy relic of Philly theater, if you ask me. That eagle has seen a lot of good shows. But then we stopped in front of a succession of framed posters from the 1950s and 60s before eventually going downstairs into the first floor lobby. Now, apologies if you can hear a slight hum of traffic outside or the noise of the ice machines of the concession bars inside as we talked.
These were all Schubert tryouts at the Walnut,
Right.
either coming in or going out. This is the interesting one here, Something Wild in the Country. They got a new title on it called Orpheus Descending.
So they've stamped it in red. New
They
title
stamped
Orpheus
it.
Descending, because, well, it was during the tryout period here, they didn't like the title.
Right.
They tried something else. But we also have The Dark at the Top of the Stairs, Kiss and Tell. Some shows that made it, like The Rainmaker, or Look Homeward Angel, and other ones, Life with Mother. But the man who had all the luck, it was Arthur Miller's first big play, which performed here, and it didn't actually have a lot of luck, but the evidence of it is here. So now there's a lot of photographs of historic productions, and then there'll be the year underneath and a short descriptive paragraph. We have Alfred Lunt, Lynn Fontanne, Ethel Waters, Paul Robeson, Woody Allen. Astounding, the range of American entertainers that worked here.
There's my attempt at humor.
Oh, okay.
When we read the history book.
Right. So here's a photograph of Henry Fonda in Mr. Roberts, and you see he's standing looking at an actor holding in a sailor's uniform. He's holding a goat by the collar. The Tony Award-winning play Mr. Roberts opened at the Walnut for its pre-Broadway tryout in January 1948. This production starred Henry Fonda, right, as a soft-spoken Navy lieutenant. Fonda had been recently discharged from the Navy and used his own uniform in the play. He is shown here with co-star Casey Watlers and an unidentified goat.
This is Junius Brutus Booth, Richard III.
Right, there's a huge 19th century picture of Richard III and the classic Richard red cape, long curly hair and a mustache. And then we come around the corner here and there's a picture, is that Groucho, A Life in Review?
Yeah.
Yes.
We're celebrating next year 100th anniversary of their appearance at the Walnut.
The Marx Brothers themselves,
Marx
yes,
Brothers
and I'll say
themselves.
she is, yeah. But we're coming down into the main lobby now. So we're down at street level. Outside through the glass doors, we can see people out on the street waiting for the bus. But there's a series of glass-covered display cases. So then why do all these displays exist? Why do you feel it's important that the audience experience this? Because this is in the main audience area. When people come in before the show, during intermissions, after the show, they pass by all this significant historical memorabilia. You've been making sure this stuff is available to them for the last 40 years. What essential experience do you feel that it provides people? What quality does it give to their experience as theater goers?
Well, I always enjoyed history. Growing up in England, I was a member of a theatrical family, been in the business for over 200 years. And I thought it was important to show the people of Philadelphia just how important the Walnut was historically, because we'd been stripped. When the Schuberts sold this theater to the non-profit, they stripped everything. There's one piece that I'll show you that the Schuberts left behind, because it was so specific to the Walnut, it didn't make any difference to them. But everything that was here at the time is now in their archives in New York. They stripped it.
I did not know that.
So everything we got by dint of hard labor and research. This statue I found in a flea shop.
So we're looking at a statue of Joseph Jefferson
That's right.
holding two pistols.
He's playing Bob Acres in The Rivals,
Right.
which was the first play produced here in 1812.
Right, but not with him.
No, not
Although
with
he was
him.
born shortly after.
Not with him, but he did make a huge living playing not only Bob Acres, but he played Rip Van Winkle.
Right, right. We had an episode about him last summer, but he actually named his estate down in Louisiana was called Bob Acres.
Was it?
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah. His house.
So there's an Edwin Forrest,
Right.
and there I think is Louisa Lane.
Yes, as Mrs. Malaprop,
Uh-huh.
which she did with Joseph Jefferson
Yeah.
for many years. Here is our old friend Edwin Forrest.
Yeah.
And we've written and talked about this statue in the podcast. Right now, he commissioned this himself, but I should let you tell the story. Right now, I need to point out he's got a
Parrot head.
a hat and a necklace of fake flowers around him because of the current show, the Welcome to Margaritaville. So, and I know at Christmas
Well-
time he gets his special decorations too.
There's 5.5 ton of marble here. This statue was never placed outdoors, but the pedestal was never put indoors initially because they couldn't fit it into his home. So when you feel this is like butter, when you feel this, you can feel the acid rain, what
Ah.
it does to the marble.
So that was out in his yard.
So the Orphans Court, finally, we petitioned the Orphans Court when he was going to be deaccessioned from the Historical
Right, it
Society.
was in their lobby for like
Judge
10 years.
McAdam.
Yeah.
And he ruled in our favor. Not only ruled in our favor, but he made the Edwin Forrest Trust and the museum pay to have him transported here. Cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Plus the steel that we had to put in the floor to hold
Right.
him up.
Yeah, because
5.5 ton of marble.
Yes, so there's special reinforcement underneath the floor here.
Uh-huh. So this is Coriolanus.
Right.
And I also got, from the Charlotte Cushman Club, I managed to get this piece
So we're looking over on the wall
that
now.
mirrors
Yeah.
his performance. And
Right.
he played the Academy because he could sell more tickets. He was very interested in the monetary value of his performances.
So of all the Philadelphia actors who have worked here, why has Edwin Forrest sort of become now an important icon for the theater? And to your
Well,
your interest
he
in-
made his debut here in 1820. He was 14 years old. When he first appeared here in a play called Douglas, he was just given the credit, a young man of Philadelphia. We had to discover who he was, and someone has inked his name in where it is on the playbill. I have the original playbill upstairs.
Do you?
And then his career took off.
Well, then he went west, right? Then he went out to the.
Well, he went south, he went west, he
Yeah.
went everywhere.
Yeah.
He was probably the wealthiest actor in America throughout his career. He amassed a fortune.
Did it make him happy?
No, it didn't make him happy. He had a very unhappy marriage. He was less than successful in his British debut.
Right.
He also got into entanglement with Macready,
Right.
which
Famously.
became the Astor Place riots.
Right. But then he continued, even after that point, he continued to come back here. We have, throughout the 50s
He
and
did.
60s, he
He
would
did.
always begin a tour here
Yeah.
at the Walnut.
Yeah.
He liked it.
Yeah, I think he saw this probably as his sort of spiritual home. That's why I wanted him here. That's why I went to such lengths with the Orphans Court to petition and get him here.
We then went down into the basement lounge area of the Walnut, which is named after the Barrymore family. And it displays lots of photos and paintings of the Barrymores and the Drews, and there are even more historic posters and other items there. I'm afraid the audio that Chris captured on this part of the tour mostly consisted of Bernard and me reading names off the wall, like the two theater history nerds that we are. I'll spare you because mostly it sounded like this. Grace Kelly,
She, Ethel Barrymore,
Catherine Cornell,
Sarah Churchill,
Billy Burke,
Catherine Cornell, yeah.
Claude Rains,
Alfred Lunt's in there.
sure, Ellen Terry, Henry Irving,
Charles Wyndham.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
amazing. After we came up out of the basement, we went to the Donors Lounge off the first floor, which contains more chronological display of significant moments in theater history, as well as going back into the company green room, where there are many sentimental items on the walls about longtime Walnut costume and set designers, as well as a memorial to the late beloved comptroller of the Walnut, Len Carabell. But there was, again, a show in rehearsal on stage, which made things a little noisy in the green room. So we retreated once again to Bernard's office to conclude our conversation. You've been working all this time in assembling the historic artifacts and in creating your own history. You now have 40 years of history here, which is also being suitably documented and collected and will be part of the long-term history of theater. How do you see yourself as more as a custodian or as a working, living person of the theater that is creating history? How do those two mesh together? The fact that you're both collecting history and creating it at the same time in your work here.
Well, I mean, my principal interest is to keep this institution alive and viable. And in order to do that, you've got to earn at least $160,000 a week to keep the wheels of this theater turning. So the history, much as I enjoy it and love it, it doesn't produce any money. And so it's of negligible value in terms of keeping this institution moving forward.
And yet it seems to have some sort of spiritual value.
Absolutely. I think, those people who enjoy and appreciate history, there's a lot to be enjoyed here.
Right. But do you think that it adds monetary value in the sense that when people are arriving at this theater, they know they're coming to a historic. Do you
That's-
feel that the audience tends to appreciate the experience? We're seeing
Some
this
do,
play,
some
this current
do,
moment,
some
in a
do.
historic house, and that adds
It would be
extra
it would be
significance
more
and resonance.
appreciated in Europe than it would be here.
Yeah.
Most Americans don't have a great deal of interest
What about
in history.
the artists who are working on the stage? Like, for instance, I recently was talking to Ilana, who was playing your Maggie the Cat in Cat in a Hot Tin Roof. And she asked me, she came to me because we're old friends. She said, I want to know who else has done this role here. I want to know who, when Tennessee Williams was in the building, that seemed to give her a way into her character, feeling that she was in a historic space. Have you had many other artists, or other artists, have they felt that being in a historic space has added extra impetus and resonance and inspiration for their work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Matt Amira, who played Rocky for us, I couldn't believe that he was treading the same stage as Marlon Brando and the great actors that have preceded him. So I think for a lot of artists, it is a very exciting experience to walk on a stage where they know that there have been some fantastic artists have played here.
Right. Well, that's what, Bernard, thank you so much. I'm
You're
shaking your
welcome.
hand here.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
So I'm narrating that so the audience knows what I'm doing.
And I'm shaking hands with Christopher
And I'm
as well.
shaking Christopher, who's been
So
holding the
interesting.
mic all this time.
So interesting.
And this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for making time for us.
You're welcome.
And there we left it. I would like to thank everyone at the Walnut Street Theatre, Bernard, Brian, Mark Sylvester, and everyone else who made our visit there so easy and so pleasant. And I urge you all, sometime in the future, when you're seeing a show at the Walnut, take some time to get there early and take a look around and really look. If you're ever lucky enough to get into the office space or go backstage, peek around. There are lots of treasures to be found. Thanks for coming along with us on this tour of the Walnut Street Theatre. We'll go back to one of our narrative episodes next time around, and we'll get back to our stories about censorship and conflict in the Philadelphia theater, this time in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Thanks for coming along on another adventure in theater history, Philadelphia.